Welcome to the HealthTech Edge, the podcast on how technology is reshaping healthcare operations. I'm Mike Moore. Today, I'm joined by Josh Resnikoff, CEO of Sunstone Health. Sunstone was built to solve a problem most people don't understand until they live it. When a child is clearly sick, but the system can't tell you why. Families can spend years going from specialist to specialist without answers, a roadmap, or the right care. Sunstone partners with self-insured employers to find those hidden cases earlier using AI-driven pattern recognition and claims data. And once a family opts in, Sunstone helps pull together the clinical and genetic picture and supports local clinicians with specialist-reviewed insights to move faster towards diagnosis and effective treatment. We're going to dig into how this works in the real world, how clinical oversight stays in the loop, and how privacy is protected in an employer-sponsored environment. Josh, welcome to the show.
Pitch perfect introduction. That was fantastic. Thank you.
Well, I do my best, and certainly we want to give the audience, something for their mileage here, and kind of make sure they know what they're getting into with the discussion. So, let's go ahead and start off with the origin story, because I think that there's so many stories in healthcare. They're so deeply personal for many of us. But let's start with your story. You were working as a biomedical engineer, building technology, publishing research, and then something happened at home that changed everything. So what happened?
It's an unfortunate truth that so many of us in the healthcare space are actually motivated by the absolute terrible experience we have in healthcare, and my story is certainly no different. Like you said, I was a bench scientist at Harvard Med at a place called the Wyss Institute. I have three boys now. This is a story about my second one, who was born absolutely normal, very easy birth, happy little guy, healthy little guy, until he was about 18 months old. And then he would it was incredible how fast the onset of this was. He got fevers on a monthly basis. And so he'd go from running around the house, playing with his brother, to just hitting 105. And in the time, I could leave him on the couch and go into the kitchen to get a glass of water and come back, and he would just be an absolute mess. And so, when you have a baby who's 105 degrees, you go to the hospital. There's just no, it's not, you worry about seizures, you worry about all sorts of things. Challenge for us was that, when it's a one-off, you're like, wow, kid got sick. Then it happens again, and then it happens again. And then all of a sudden you start to become on a first name basis with the triage nurse in the emergency room, and no one can tell you what's going on. And from that scientist parent to now parent caregiver, really frustrated with the system. I mean, that's where it comes from. It's unfortunately the terrible experience that I had with my kid that I now know even pales compared to what many other families have to go through, and really trying to change that forever for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's I can relate to this in the way that my wife is a registered nurse. We have three children. When they get sick, it's kind of, I can tell where she's coming from, how she reacts, right? Is it coming from the brain and kind of the nursing skills? Is it coming from the heart, and the emotions of a mother, right? And it's hard to, obviously the two are connected, and it's hard to separate, but it is that ability, I think, to look at it from the logical sense of kind of the take the emotion out of it, be a parent, be an objective person, and kind of try to figure out and like do problem solving like many of us do in our day jobs, right? Like, how do I apply that to it? So you made the move. Obviously, your son's case has the motivation for it, but you created Sunstone. So let's explain to the listeners, what does Sunstone do?
Piece at the top. You did a fantastic job summarizing the nature of our company. Really, there are 30 million Americans with a genetic disease. We used to call them rare diseases. It's a terrible name. They are genetic diseases. Half of those are children. All right. And the problem for these kids is that our healthcare system is fragmented, and it is not really built to work quickly for these, right? When kids don't fit into a very easy box, all of a sudden now you start going from specialist to specialist. Specialists are really reacting to what's in front of them. It is no one's job to connect the dots across, all of the care, the continuum of care that you're going to get. And so really that we do, we start with employer claims data for a lot of reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into. But ultimately what we are trying to do is find kids on their pattern of presentation, the same way that a clinician would think about finding a kid based on pattern of presentation. But we use AI to just interpret all of that information much faster and constantly, as opposed to a doctor has to see kid after kid after kid on a daily basis, right? And really at the end, we are trying to surface kids that deserve a second or third look as fast as possible so we can get a human in the loop to make a decision about them. We're not trying to replace doctors.
And I think that it's important to consider kind of who your customer is, because in many ways we talk about the patient, being that child with some sort of genetic disorder or mutation or kind of whatever the issue is that's presenting, through these hospital visits or emergency room visits, what happens. But who do you consider your customer? There are a variety of stakeholders in the mix here, right?
Yeah, there's at least 5 stakeholders that I can identify very quickly. But when you said before, systems guy, but engineer by training and nature very much. And so when I looked at the entire system, look, my mission to help families. Families are taxed, right? And families, frankly, aren't the ones who are going to benefit financially. They do, obviously, no one wants to pay out of pocket for stuff over and over again. We live that life. But the risk bearity, the people who backstop your financial exposure in the system are health plans, right? And that could be a fully commercial insured health plan. It could be a self-funded insured employer health plan. There's so many different, flavors of what health insurance looks like today. And I think a lot of people, certainly this was me 3 years ago, you're like, oh yeah, insurance, right? It's just sort of one bucket of money that floats out there. But we focus on employer health plans. These self-funded health plans as our entry point into the market. And for a couple reasons. The first is that you talk about commercial health. These are your Uniteds, your Blues, sort of the big boys in the space. They have lots and lots and lots of lives, but they're really trapped in this mentality where they only think about patients in really what is about a 24-month timescale, because patients hop from plan to plan so often that if you can't do something that gives them basically $1 billion back in their pocket within 18 months, they don't want to talk to you. So no matter what you're doing for a patient, there's no scale you're going to achieve because there's no financial stickiness. Okay. So we are to make sure that the work that we do has almost immediate payback, right? A plan, regardless of who that plan is going to be, they're going to get their financials back from us within a first year. So that was the first level of stickiness. That's patients get healthier very, very quickly, but it's back to the money. But then when we talk to employers have this much longer time horizon. They actually have this motivation to do the right thing for their employees who are their members in that health plan. And frankly, it is a much easier conversation for us to go have because they are doubly motivated to do the right thing, right? They do have a bottom line incentive, but they also have an actual member outcome incentive. And that's really important for us, for me personally, morally, and just sort of for the kind of business we want to build, about how we want to scale. And it turns out it's not like we're focusing on a small slice of the pie. About 65% of the Americans get their health insurance through an employer plan. So it's actually a good chunk of, it's the majority of the market for us to go after.
When you think about that, because of the data sources that you're working off of, and who ultimately pays the bill are those employers with the employer-sponsored plan. Let's talk a little bit about privacy and kind of sensitivity of the data. There was a story a few months ago about Google doing kind of an open enrollment, and said, they later claimed they suggested, but it looked like a requirement at the beginning that everyone share their health data, their claims data, and everything with this third party that was going to do some analysis and magically recommend the right plan. Huge pushback from employees at a place like Google, right, where it's obviously they literally work on this AI technology every day. So there's clearly some sensitivity around data. So take it to lay people who are just working, a variety of industries, or maybe work at, the Walmarts of the world and some of these national employers that are self-insured. So when you take that data in, when you're working with patients and their families, how do you think about and how do you manage the privacy, especially as it relates to what gets shared back with the employer who's ultimately footing the bill for this?
The easiest answer, don't share anything back with the employer, right? Like our whole So as a dad to one of these kids, as a person who wants to use this service, I also want to build the service that I want to use, right? So I don't want people come through my medical data or my kids' medical data unless I tell them that they can. So everything that we do is opt-in. I mean, that's first and foremost, right? Secondly, again, when I'm doing my competitive analysis on the space, you look at a lot of these companies who say, hey, we're going to go do this work for you. We're going to go help you get sequenced. We're going to pull your medical records. And now those are my medical records. If you ask for access to them, oh no, that's our proprietary data. That's total BS to me, right? So every family that comes onto our space, whatever service we do for them, sequencing, expert review, all of that lives in space that is theirs to download, right? We do ask so that we can use it so we can help improve the service and make things better for the next family. But ultimately, what's called the right to be forgotten. So if you want to download your information and you say, thank you very much for the service and you want to go, God bless. That's just fundamentally important to me as a free individual in America. From the employer side, it's actually really beneficial to the employer. They appreciate this about us, that we have an opt-in service for their employees that is divorced from their platform. And ultimately, it gives them a liability coverage from what's called GINA, from the Genetic Non-Discrimination Act. And really it means that when and we until identify patients who may benefit from our services, all we're getting the employer to do is commit to the idea that they will pay us once we have helped someone. So we to the employee, sometimes we do that through video or an email mailer, right? But like, hey, if this feels like it applies to you, employee is willing to underwrite your services, right, as an additional benefit to you. If you go sign up and we're an active member on Josh's platform, it'll get paid for. We'll pay for it. We'll cover your costs. And so then when that comes to us, we can be extending them, but they're not there as employee of XYZ company. They're there as mom and dad with a kid. And it's just the easiest way for us to keep that, that important security gap in between everything. And obviously we're HIPAA compliant, we're all the additional things that the individual would want to make sure that their data and security is protected.
Yeah, I think that there's obviously, your medical records, your claims data, obviously once we get into genetic testing, right, and kind of developing that profile as well, like you've really got it all kind of on the table. And so that's, there's a lot of really kind of critical and private, elements to it clearly, that families care about. So let's talk a little bit about AI in your workflow and kind of how the platform works today. What's AI actually doing as part of all the orchestration here?
When we use it to think about how clinicians review clinical chart, apply that same kind of thinking to how we review claims data to go off and flag those early patterns. We use AI basically to keep us up to date on what guidelines are, what new research is, to go off and make sure that the patterns that we're thinking about are the most up-to-date patterns that a clinician would be thinking about. And again, we have humans who help guide that, right? But ultimately, once you can kind of push the machine to go make good decisions. So we flag kids with AI, but we have a human review the actual one, pediatric neurologist in this case. And frankly, that's just because there's so much information out there that you want to be able to keep up to date with it. And AI is kind of custom built to do that kind of application. So it's a way for us to ingest a lot of data on the front end and rapidly go through this. And frankly, Mike, it's the kind of thing that it just might take literally weeks, if not months, to go through hundreds of thousands of lines of claims data to flag the individual longitudinal patterns that we can now do in a few seconds with AI, right? So there's no reason not to apply that kind of deep thinking, deep pattern recognition on the front end. That's the first place. The next place it comes in is a very similar application, but for those patients that have actually gone through, where we take the genetic information and the clinical information on that patient and create basically a profile about them, then go off all the relevant data, all the research, all the clinical guidelines to create a custom technical report for that individual and that family. And that report goes off again to a pediatric neurologist for review. So all of the kind of research that a clinician would do on a family that's in front of them, that again, just might take them hundreds of hours to go do, we can surface that report for them in a couple of minutes so that they can now make an informed decision about a patient. And then they provide what's called peer-to-peer guidance or doctor-to-doctor guidance, but it's because of the knowledge they have from how to treat human beings, right? It's not a computer saying, this is what you should do. So it's enabling technology, the same way that this is enabling technology.
Yeah, that's great. I think it makes so much sense because we know that, you talk about pattern recognition, right? Like, a doctor might be looking at a child with a set of symptoms and recurring symptoms, but they may not have seen this before, no matter how many years they've been practicing. And so the ability to look at a much larger set of data from patients around the country or even potentially around the world that have similar kind of profile to then start to connect the dots and give us ideas to investigate further. It just makes so much more sense. And I know that in the world of drug development, for example, that's where AI is being applied, right? Like, what are the proteins that might make sense, based on whatever it is we're trying to do, right? So similar kind of thing in trying to develop a diagnosis. What I like about what you spoke in there is that clearly AI can't diagnose people, right?
Doesn't
It
do that.
can it can notice things, it can surface things, but then ultimately it is those trained medical professionals we've helped by gathering, summarizing, doing some pattern recognition, bringing that forward. Um, and then ultimately presenting that to someone with a medical license who has to make that final call and either write the order, prescribe the therapy, whatever is needed, right? So that to me is a critical piece, that you're not turning over all of this work to AI. There is a human in the loop medical oversight part of this process.
I work with AI all the time. I don't want a computer telling me what it's like. We know they hallucinate. You need someone who's actually grounded in truth to say, hey, this is what we're gonna do. And hey, I've seen kids like this before. And to your point, absolutely, as we go off and we see more and more and more kids, it helps us get closer and closer and closer to what the right path forward for that child might be. But there will always be a doctor, a human in the loop at the end of the day who says, this is how I want, right? And I just think it makes so much sense. Like, I think there's a lot of hype around things like AI. They look really shiny. We think that they're going to be the silver bullet, but to me, it's just that we always consider them as enabling technology, enabling us to take another step forward, enabling us to do a little bit more research. And when you put it into that context, it's like, of course, using it, right? If it can help you make better decisions, but it still needs to be helping us to make better decisions.
Yeah, I think the time savings is a huge factor too, because as you say, like, parents taking kids to an emergency room, those high fevers or whatever the symptoms they might be experiencing. As parents, I think you and I as dads, like, we would happily take anything that's happening to our children and put it to me instead, right? Let me have those symptoms, let me suffer. I would gladly take that from my child to make them well, right? But it doesn't work that way. But if we can make things happen faster and accelerate the progress, where it feels like the healthcare system, when you're in those situations especially, it just doesn't move fast enough. And now if we can accelerate that with AI to get to a point where we see things with more clarity and then have something to bring back to our doctors and talk about, why wouldn't we use that as an accelerant?
Would not agree with. I mean, as a parent, you will move mountains for your child, right? And so that's why you have families who climb on a plane to fly across the country to go see the one doctor who might know how to treat their patient. Like, that's great if you have time. Doctor has the aha moment, right? The eureka moment. I know what's wrong with your kid. So you can think about us just trying to make sure that that aha moment is not an aha moment. It's just the course of care for every sick kid out there, right? So if you go to your PCP, but then end up at the minute clinic, right, later on that night or later next week, like, those dots just connected for you. And to me, that's just, I thought healthcare worked, but it's not how healthcare works. And so all we're really trying to do at Sunstone is just make healthcare deliver on the way that we all believe it's supposed to work, but it's just not working today.
And I think for many clinicians, not being a licensed medical professional myself, but I have to imagine that's why they do it, right? Those are the outcomes they want to be able to produce for patients, especially children and their families. They're just stuck in a system that doesn't have all the dots connected. They're not empowered with all the information, the tools that they would want from a diagnostic or whatever point of view. But now this can essentially give them some of those superpowers too, right?
To that point, I mean, we don't get, everyone's always like, oh, doctors, they don't like to be told what to do. We're not telling anyone what to do. We're just an AI super agent in your pocket, giving you all the information that you would want to go see anyway, just in a very easy to use manner. So you can do your, that probably were inspired to do as a teenager that sent you to med school and maybe specialty as well, right? But now you can do it better, more effective, see more kids, you can help more people. Like, everybody gets to win in this.
So when families get the results, right? So they've, the claims data, the medical data, all that history has gone in, genetic testing and all of that. They get kind of a result that comes back out of Sunstone. They bring that information to their clinicians. Do you ever run into any resistance or skepticism from when they take it back to their doctors or specialists that they're seeing on the case?
The reason for that is as we were building the product, the biggest place that we would get resistance was from doctors, PCPs, or even specialty. The unfortunate is that even in a general 4-year medical program, you get about 2 weeks of genetic training. So doctor, it's just not a tool in their tool set that they know how to use or feel comfortable using, and therefore they don't wanna miss something, right? Like, there are no I think frustrated with doctors and maybe like the lack of speed in the healthcare system, but everybody is trying to do their best. You have to appreciate that everybody is trying to do their best and they're using the best tools that they know how to use. All right. And the biggest pushback we used to get was, hey, I don't know how to interpret these results, which is one of the reasons why we do the interpretation and we do the peer to peer guidance for them so that somebody doesn't have to say, well, great. You've shown me that this kid has SYNGAP1 mutation. Like, just identifying the problem is actually not a very functional outcome. If I if you if I went to your car and was like, "Hey, your check engine light is on," not helpful, right? So you actually bring that how do you influence care? How do you manage this child to that doctor, their local doctor who that family has trust with? They're the ones they like to see. Um, and that for us was really sort of like the final piece of the puzzle to make sure that clinical outcomes were happening. But so to your question directly, we don't get that pushback because we've solved for it in the system.
Yeah, and I think that's it's unbelievable too that here we are in this day and age, and 2 weeks of training on genetics is kind of, unless someone specializes. But there are so many things, the education and kind of the curriculum that's being followed, and what it's going to look like 10 or 20 years from now, especially with the AI moves. It's kind of crazy. But we've obviously been talking a lot about pediatrics, right, and kind of children as your focus. Are you looking at the full population of all the members of a plan, or are you just really focused in on kids, or kind of why kids is kind of this focus, um, and the opportunities maybe around early intervention for them versus adults? What's the story there?
Very much so the latter, right? So we get all of the information from a plan, right? So we see every single member in a claims file. Um, for a lot of growth reasons, for a lot of future reasons. I have lots of doctors who focus on cardio, who focus on other parts of neuro, right? There's so much opportunity to intervene with patients before they get diagnosed based on the patterns of how they're presenting, that if the intervention, you offset. I mean, go pick a study, right? Where like if you can find someone earlier and you can help them get on a stat, having them do open heart surgery, that's a lot of money that you're going to save as a plan. So there's a lot of interest in how you get that. We've seen that predictive analytics by themselves are not actually very effective because you're really just pointing out, hey, your check engine light is on. So you really need to track them to that clinical change, right? That's a big part of what my company does. Um, Today, we're really focused on pediatrics because there is so applied to that space, right? There are precision medicine cancer companies. There are quite a few precision medicine diabetes companies, like people who are trying to manage these things. But peds are, for whatever reason, and I don't even fully understand why at this point, because to me, the opportunity of intervention, both from a patient outcome perspective, but also from a market perspective, is so massive in the pediatric space. It's really for us to go off and make a lot of positive impact and capture a pretty good market, right? So it does both the right thing for patients, but also is an opportunity for investors to get involved with and really go hit scale. I think the clinical utility too, if that's interesting for you, like intervene with a kid who has an obvious severe one, maybe not. I mean, there's papers out there right now. You can get that kid off of ABA therapy by the time they get to elementary school. You can save a child somewhere between 10 and 40 IQ points if you catch them early enough, not once problems have compounded and now you're 5, 6, 7 years old and you need intensive ABA therapy at an elementary school level. If you can find that child early and start them early, you offset so much downstream issue. It's the difference between a kid who might need care every year of their life forever to some might be able to live independently and just be a person. Like, um, I don't know. To me the value of outcomes is so, I'm very passionate about it. That I do for children is really the place to focus.
Yeah, I think that it makes sense from an economic point of view, obviously, right? The earlier you can intervene and prevent a lifetime set of medical expenses, right? If you want to just purely look at it from an economic lens, that makes sense. From a quality of life, from a independence, or from kind of whatever the future may hold for that child, it makes a ton of sense. And then I have to think, going back to kind of who pays the bills for this, from an employee loyalty point of view, we think about, I was very fortunate the years where we had two of our three kids. I was working at Microsoft. Microsoft was self-insured and at the time paid 100% of health insurance costs, and there were no copays for anything and no copays for prescriptions. So to have two of our three children and also all the the well check visits and those kind of things, or even sick visits for our oldest one, during those 11, almost 12 years that I was there, I mean, that made me feel great, right? Like I'm doing work that I feel is, important, and, from a tech industry point of view, and kind of what Microsoft does for customers, but then also how Microsoft compensates and rewards me, with these great benefits as an employee. It drives the loyalty up significantly. I have to imagine you get that kind of feedback from your families there as well, that they feel strongly about the benefit, this, incredibly powerful and unique benefit that they're being provided with, that's sponsored by their employer.
100%. There is no other, if you want to call us a benefit or a platform, whatever it is, but there is nobody else out there like us who can go and off and help these families. And so whether you're a tire manufacturer or a Microsoft, who, if Microsoft's listening, would love to talk to you. But if you can get cost containment on a very expensive part of your balance sheet and do the right thing for your families, we also don't charge a PEPM. We only charge if we only send an invoice if we actually help the family. So there's no upfront risk. Like, win for everyone. And now you haven't just helped that kid set up for success. You have helped mom and not be stressed out. I mean, like, you talk about having to take to the ER, let alone thinking about, like, well, what do I have to manage this week so that my child can get the kind of care they need, right? On a chronic basis. How much work am I going to have to miss this quarter to make sure my kid's going to the doctor and therapy on time? Downstream knock-on effect, right, to what you're saying, of just like happy employees because they're happy. I mean, if my mom isn't happy, I'm not productive. That's just it. I think that's for every parent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, there is that, for us to be well as a family, for you and your partner and your children, and kind of, it affects everyone in the household, right? When you've got, anyone who's sick, never mind with chronic issues or with, these kind of mysteries, like there's this TV show called Watson where he runs a genetic lab, and there's a bit of a Sherlock Holmes kind of twist to the plot of the whole show. But within an hour's time, people who come in with these genetic mutations, they're able to figure it out and solve the issue, and just like many TV shows, wrap it up with a bow, and that's great. And that's not real life, right? Like that's the challenge. So I think this has been really eye-opening for me, Josh, learning about what you and the team are doing at Sunstone, and certainly wish you and your family well, and all the families that you take care of as part of the service that you provide. So we'll go ahead and include a note in the show notes, a link to your website so people can learn more about it, connect with you if they're interested, and follow the work that you and the team are doing. So thank you so much for being a part of the show today.
Great conversation, lots of fun. And yeah, if anyone's out there who wants to work with us, we'd love to work with you. So appreciate the platform, Mike. Really do.
That's great. Well, thank you so much again. And for everyone listening, if you enjoyed today's conversation, please go ahead, like, comment, share, subscribe to the podcast for more episodes of the HealthTech Edge. With that, we'll go ahead and sign off.